Hello, my name is Jeremy, and this is the True Crime Chronicles channel. The bond between the mother-in-law and the son-in-law frequently fails to be positive. Yet within the Lynch household, the situation was unique. The parents cherished their daughter's spouse, but this was solely before the couple cohabited. Today's narrative unfolds in Essex, England, where Jennifer Cronin and her daughter Susan resided. Jennifer was fiercely dedicated to her family and offspring. She was an engaging, friendly, and compassionate woman who shared an exceptionally tight bond with her daughter Susan. They held each other in high regard. From a young age, the girl observed the dynamic between her parents and aspired to someday establish her own family, with children, and a spouse who would gaze upon her with equally affectionate eyes. In 1990, Susan introduced Kieran Lynch, a young man she was dating. At that time, she was an apprentice hairdresser. Known for her unique style, her boyfriend, a bricklayer by profession, worked on various construction projects and was 3 years her senior. Susan appreciated the way Kieran treated her. Even her friends remarked that he appeared willing to worship the ground she walked on. Their idyllic relationship naturally led to marriage in 1994. It mattered greatly to Susan that her new husband mesh well with her parents, and indeed, he did. The son-in-law and mother-in-law quickly established a rapport. The couple later welcomed 2 daughters, Matilda and Molly, who were exceedingly fond of their grandparents, visiting them no less than twice a week. The youngsters would excitedly run to Jennifer upon recognizing her gentle voice. While they were young, they saw their father as the pinnacle of virtue, the most giving and magnificent man. Kieran devoted all his leisure time to his daughters, notwithstanding his extensive work hours. Yet there was another aspect to his personality. He possessed a keen competitive spirit. Kieran was always determined to excel in all endeavors and harbored an intense urge to dominate and craft the image of an ideal family. He diligently worked to support his wife and 2 daughters. Yet the pressure mounted, and at times, he found it challenging to manage this stress and channel his feelings constructively. Consequently, his frustration often manifested in outbursts of rage, during which Kieran would damage objects and cause chaos. As time passed, the situation deteriorated. His outbursts became more intense and aggressive, particularly when alcohol was a factor. The daughters' perceptions of their father shifted. They vividly recalled incidents of their intoxicated father initially shouting, seeking any pretext for criticism, then progressing to hurl plates against walls, slam doors, and overturn furniture. In such moments, the girls would seek refuge, hiding from their irate father's view until he slept. They moved silently within the home, careful not to rouse him. Following these fits of anger, he exhibited remorse, mending what he had destroyed the prior day, and attempting to rationalize his actions. He earnestly apologized to his wife and daughters, promising such incidents would not recur. Yet, inevitably, the cycle resumed. Like many individuals facing domestic violence, Susan was engulfed in shame and discomfort, concealing the turmoil within her household. Despite striving to project strength before her daughters, she was consumed by tears in the solitude of night, puzzled by the transformation of a once affectionate man into a domestic oppressor. On evenings Kieran returned home agitated. Susan and her daughters would ensure the windows were sealed, preventing neighbors from overhearing the tumult of his outbursts. The slightest provocation could ignite a storm. Delays in Susan's return from work prompted Kieran to scour the town in search. As the girls matured, they began to confront their father in defense of their mother, initially causing him to retract. His demeanor would swiftly shift, reverting to the affectionate partner and parent. However, a grave incident occurred when Kieran, engulfed by fury, nearly struck his daughter, who intervened to shield Susan. Despite the family's efforts to veil their strife from external scrutiny, the grim reality gradually surfaced. In 2015, those close to Kieran began to observe unsettling transformations in him. A friend of Susan's, residing in a different city, was taken aback by Lynch's altered appearance. Having not seen him for several months, she hardly recognized him during an unexpected meeting in the city. He had significantly slimmed down, appeared gaunt, and had a distant, contemplative demeanor. The cause behind these changes soon came to light. While doing laundry, Susan found a packet of white powder and a slender tube in her husband's work attire, after emptying out the pockets of forgotten change and various items. She instantly connected this discovery to Kieran's erratic behavior, which filled her with fear. She confronted her husband via text, lamenting his choices and prioritizing them over his family. Yet Kieran offered no excuses, merely pleading with her not to disclose anything to their daughters. As substantial amounts of money started vanishing from their credit card, Susan attempted to confront Kieran, who responded with defensiveness and aggression. The atmosphere at home grew increasingly tense and perilous. On one occasion, in the absence of their daughters, Kieran menaced Susan with a knife to her throat, threatening her life and his own. Another instance saw him preparing a noose in the attic. Such terrifying incidents became more common. Susan recognized that without intervention, the situation might escalate disastrously. Despite the difficulty, she felt unable to confide in her own mother, Jennifer, wishing to spare her distress. Nonetheless, despite her desire to reverse their circumstances, Susan acknowledged the necessity for resolute action. In November 2016, following 24 years of wedlock, the Lynch couple agreed to part ways. Kieran bravely chose to exit the family residence and move back in with his parents. It was a challenging decision, yet Susan recognized that their daughters were mature enough and shouldn't be exposed to endless disputes and uproars. Additionally, her primary worry was their well-being. The lady was comforted by the fact that the separation transpired with minimal conflict. She even held herself accountable for not acting sooner. Susan was unaware that her ex-spouse had no intention of giving up. When Kieran departed, a congenial ambiance finally pervaded the home. The strain diminished, and everything started to ameliorate gradually. For the first time in a long stretch, Susan experienced joy. She and her daughters were able to engage in conversations peacefully, enjoy films together, share laughter, and relish life. The need to anticipate and decipher their father's mood upon his return from work was no longer present. Susan sensed that she still attracted male attention, and she blossomed more with each day. Friends noted that Kieran appeared to have resumed a typical lifestyle. Susan was pleased that someone once dear to her had at last made a wise decision and abandoned his detrimental behaviors, even though they were no longer together. Kieran remained the father of her children. Following an exceedingly stressful and challenging family life, Susan was cautious about entering new relationships until she encountered Mike. Their relationship evolved gradually, embodying the adage, once bitten, twice shy. Having endured significant challenges previously, she was now exceedingly prudent. Gradually, Mike became significantly integrated into her life. Susan even confided in him about her former spouse, the difficulties she endured, and the complexities of her past relationships. To fully detach from Kieran and progress, securing an official divorce was essential. Susan felt hesitant, knowing Lynch's erratic and unpredictable nature, yet she opted to text her former spouse, proposing a cafe meetup for discussion. To her astonishment, the encounter unfolded without a hitch. Kieran appeared to accept the news of her wish to initiate divorce proceedings positively. For once, they conversed as friends who had shared significant experiences. Following the meeting, the ex-partners even shared brief texts. Lynch expressed his happiness for her newfound relationship, and Susan voiced her hope that Kieran would find fortune in love soon as well. It seemed like a triumph, she believed, until she received multiple messages from her ex the following day. Lynch's attitude towards the divorce shifted dramatically from the previous day. He claimed indifference towards his ex-wife and demanded $60,000 for his agreement to sign the divorce documents, arguing that he had already left her the house and all its contents and refused to passively watch another man occupy his space. Furthermore, he expressed a disturbing preference for her demise. More alarmingly, Kieran escalated beyond textual threats, manifesting in the yard wielding a hammer. At this juncture, Susan was home alone with her pet. She promptly dialed for emergency assistance. By the time law enforcement arrived, Lynch had damaged several flower pots and outdoor ornaments. The police reached the scene shortly after he vanished. 2 officers entered the premises, to whom Susan presented the menacing messages. As they recorded her account, Kieran returned, vociferously proclaiming his intent to confront his wife and asserting that no one could protect her. The responding officers arrested Kieran Lynch for disrupting the peace. Yet, even in handcuffs, his zeal remained undiminished. He persisted in throwing insults at his ex-wife. Subsequently, he faced charges on 3 counts: life-threatening behavior, carrying a dangerous weapon, and causing property damage. On January 29, 2018, at the magistrate's court, Chiron refuted all allegations. He was slated for a court appearance on March 29th and was granted bail with a strict directive to avoid any contact with Susan or to come near her residence. The decision left Susan and her daughters feeling vulnerable and incredulous at their home, dismayed by the law's leniency and doubting the police's commitment to their safety. Ignoring the bail stipulations, Chiron continued to breach the no-contact order. He incessantly phoned Susan and even appeared at her residence, escalating her fear for her safety. He deceitfully told mutual friends that Susan's new partner was taunting him with messages. Chiron also targeted his daughter's phones, aware that they would relay everything back to their mother. The situation forced Susan into a state of constant vigilance, fearful of leaving her children unattended due to Chiron's relentless calls, which could reach up to 80 times daily, and his continuous threats of showing up. Due to his failure to adhere to the bail conditions, Susan once again reached out to the authorities. Concurrently, Lynch made an unsettling call to emergency services, confessing an aborted suicide attempt due to lack of courage. A squad comprising psychologists and police officers was dispatched to engage with him. Upon their arrival, Chiron assured them he was in good condition, leading to the recommendation that he consult with his general practitioner. Observationally, he didn't seem to necessitate further mental health assistance, concluding that intervention. Nevertheless, his barrage of calls and messages persisted unabated. On multiple occasions, Chiron trespassed near the residence, engaging in trivial but menacing acts to display his proximity. He disrupted the power supply by infiltrating the garage, tampered with the garden hose at Susan's mother's home, and occasionally skulked beneath the house windows. His actions now instilled fear not only in his ex-wife and daughters, but also in his aging mother-in-law. The persecution of his former spouse escalated, with Susan's appeals to law enforcement yielding no outcomes. The police regarded it as mere verbal harassment, thus dismissing the woman's grievances each time. They arrived, recorded statements, and vowed to make an arrest, yet nothing evolved. The authorities viewed the situation as a standard domestic dispute between former partners and failed to recognize the severity of the circumstances, particularly since the offspring were grown and, in the detective's view, Lynch was not deemed a threat. Nevertheless, Chiron contacted his eldest daughter, issuing a threat of sexual assault. Upon discovering this, Susan was appalled. Law enforcement initiated a search for Lynch at his abode, but the officers did not locate him, hence advising the women to seek refuge with acquaintances or family members to steer clear of being in the domicile unaccompanied. Matilda sought refuge at a pal's place, while the oldest daughter visited her grandmother, who resided alone following her husband's demise. Jennifer and her granddaughter spent the evening watching TV, sipping tea, conversing, and momentarily forgetting about Chiron and his menacing behavior. Yet, the moment they retired for the night, the telephone chimed. Upon Jennifer answering, there was sheer silence, assuming it was a mistaken call, yet the phone persisted in ringing multiple times. Both Susan and Molly were restless due to the unnerving calls. Molly sensed the presence of someone lurking in the garden. Against the shadowy backdrop outside, a silhouette appeared to be present. They barricaded themselves with Jennifer in the washroom and contacted law enforcement. It was around 2 a.m. Concurrently, Susan's phone was inundated with calls and texts, prompting her to reach out to the police as well. Regrettably, with limited law enforcement resources, constant surveillance for the harasser was unfeasible, leading to advice on turning off the mobile and ensuring all entry points were securely locked. Over the previous 24 hours, the police were summoned 6 times. Yet despite the menacing communications, the officials declared a shortage of staff to send a patrol. On March 13, 2018, as the granddaughter departed the residence, Susan decided to visit her mother to offer support and reassurance. She assured the senior that she would not stand by while her family was tormented and intimidated by an individual who simply could not come to terms with their separation. At 72, Jennifer found solace in the daylight, venturing into the garden with her canine companion, while Susan observed them from indoors as she prepared tea. A smile crossed her face watching her mother engage with her dog. At that moment, she attempted to contact her former spouse's employer to ascertain his whereabouts, but he hadn't shown up there for several days. Unbeknownst to Susan, he would soon be alarmingly close. Abruptly, a disturbance was heard from outside, and at 10:48 a.m., Lynch charged into the garden, wielding a container of combustible fluid. He vociferously yelled, swore, and hurled insults at his mother-in-law. The man approached Jennifer and began to soak her head, face, and back with the fluid. The elderly lady shrank and shrieked, yet Kieran persisted in drenching her. Susan called emergency services, pleading for assistance. The operator instructed her to flee to the street to dodge Kieran, a suggestion the frightened woman promptly followed. She sprinted to the street's end, looked back, and saw no one pursuing her. Recalling her mother was still in the backyard, Susan hastened her return. At that juncture, Lynch doused himself with the remaining fluid and lit it using a lighter. Flames immediately engulfed both individuals. Situated in a serene dead-end street adjacent to the Benfleet golf course, Jennifer's residence quickly became the focus of police, firefighters, and medical response teams, including an air ambulance helicopter that descended onto the golf course. Upon Susan's return to her mother's garden, she was met with a ghastly sight. Two grotesquely altered bodies. Jennifer's hair, eyebrows, and eyelashes were utterly scorched, her face reddened by burns, and her skin charred. Amidst her excruciating pain, Jennifer conveyed to her daughter her deep love, and that she and her granddaughters were her entire universe. Despite her dire state, she maintained her maternal instinct, reassuring her daughter that all would be well. Kieran, too, was gravely injured with burns across his entire body. He was found seated, leaning against a wall, heavily breathing, and still smoldering. Overwhelmed by emotion, Susan berated him for his actions. She struggled to comprehend how she could have once been married to a man who now inflicted such harm on her beloved mother, whom she deeply cherished and shielded from any harm. She never envisioned such a tragic culmination. Kieran was apprehended under the suspicion of attempting to murder Jennifer Cronin. Both he and the senior lady were rushed to the hospital in a grave state. A couple of hours following the assault, Susan was summoned for an interview to piece together the event's chronology. Mr. Lynch had saturated himself and Mrs. Cronin with an inflammable substance and ignited them in the rear garden. The 50-year-old was navigating through a contentious divorce from his spouse, Susan. His former partner had persistently alerted the officials about Kieran's hostile actions, exacerbated by illicit drug use. Yet a shortfall in police resources and misjudgment in handling the situation culminated in dire outcomes. This incident swiftly caught the attention of the press, and the law enforcement's lack of action faced harsh scrutiny. Medical personnel notified Susan that Kieran's prognosis was grim, with burn injuries covering 97% of his body. This news dealt another harsh blow to the daughters, who recollected their father as a devoted and affectionate figure. One daughter expressed a desire to visit Kieran for a final farewell. The only recognizable feature was the tip of his nose, now blackened and burnt. She expressed her love to her father and lamented the tragic turn of events. Whether Kieran was aware of his daughter's last expressions of love remains uncertain. He succumbed to his injuries that evening. The toxicology report uncovered that his system had traces of both alcohol and illicit drugs. Meanwhile, Jennifer Cronin was fighting for her life in the intensive care unit, with burns covering 33% of her body, mainly on her upper body and head. She underwent surgical procedures, yet the prognosis for recovery was grim due to the extent and severity of her injuries. Susan made frequent visits to the hospital, witnessing firsthand the agony her mother endured. Ready to accept the inevitable, Susan was prepared to let her mother pass, longing for her to be in the comfort of her late husband's presence, as the sight of her mother in such torment was unbearable. Jennifer persevered for 17 days, but sadly succumbed to her injuries on March 30, 2018 at 13:32, with her family by her side. Her expression was peaceful. She was aware that her time was drawing to a close. Susan clasped her mother's hand, solemnly observing as her journey in this world concluded, and she drew her final breath. Upon realizing that his former spouse was beginning to move forward with her life, Kieran Lynch was consumed by an uncontrollable sense of possession and overwhelming jealousy, further exacerbated by his dependence on illegal drugs and alcohol. He had been covertly observing his wife for a year, but the moment she started to contemplate her own future, it triggered a drastic change in him. By assaulting a vulnerable elderly woman, his aim was to inflict pain on her daughter, fully understanding the deep bond between them. On Monday, January 21, 2019, an in-depth week-long inquiry commenced at County Hall, Chelmsford, focusing on unraveling the events leading to the deaths of 72-year-old Jennifer Cronin and 50-year-old Kieran Lynch. Susan, deeply impacted by these losses, initially harbored anger towards her ex-husband. However, as details emerged about the inadequate response from law enforcement, her frustration shifted entirely towards them. She had been familiar with her husband's escalating aggression with each communication, witnessing how his hostility expanded from her to those close to her, Jennifer, Mike, and even his daughters, creating an impression that Lynch was determined to ruin the lives of his ex-wife and her loved ones through verbal abuse, threats, nocturnal phone calls, and unlawful entries. Susan recognized Kieran's psychological instability, but could never foresee it leading to harm against her family. She publicly voiced her family's dissatisfaction with the outcomes, criticizing the police for their lack of serious engagement and unfulfilled promises. Kieran's failure to be arrested for breaching bail conditions was highlighted as a contributing factor to Jennifer Cronin's demise. Susan aspired for the authorities to draw lessons from this heart-rending incident, hoping it might prevent future tragedies, despite it not being able to bring her mother back. She emphasized the police's fundamental duty to protect and serve the community, a service she felt was grossly neglected in her family's case. Following the revelation of the family's plight, Detective Superintendent Stephen Jenkins took the initiative to personally meet with the Cronin family, extending an apology for the tragedy they endured. If you like this story, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new videos. Don't forget to like and share your opinion in the comments. This is Jeremy. See you in the next video.